The core imposter cycle. This is the relentless loop where success, instead of building genuine confidence, actually reinforces self-doubt. You achieve something significant. Maybe you get a big promotion at work or finish a challenging degree program, but instead of internalizing that success, you attribute it to external factors like luck, timing, or even just fooling people. Psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, who first documented this phenomenon in their seminal 1978 paper, The Imposter Phenomenon in High-Achieving Women, Dynamics and Therapeutic Intervention, observed that individuals in this cycle often respond negatively to positive feedback, dismissing compliments rather than accepting them as valid. This means that each new accomplishment fails to chip away at the underlying feeling of fraudulence. Instead, it becomes another piece of evidence that you've managed to get away with it. For example, a student receiving a top grade might conclude the professor was an easy grader or made a mistake, rather than acknowledging their own diligent study and intellectual grasp of the material. This internal narrative often compels individuals to overwork or overfunction to compensate for a deep-seated fear of being discovered. This overpreparation frequently leads to stellar performance, providing temporary relief, but the underlying anxiety quickly returns, compelling you to overwork again for the next challenge. It's like running on a treadmill. No matter how fast or far you go, you end up right back where you started, feeling just as threatened by the next challenge as you were by the last, trapped in a self-perpetuating cycle of anxiety and achievement. The perfectionist. This type of imposter syndrome is driven by impossibly high standards and an unwavering belief that one's worth is defined by flawlessness. Perfectionists set goals for themselves that are often beyond what is reasonable or even humanly possible, and when they inevitably fall short, they treat any small mistake as absolute proof of their fundamental incompetence. Anything less than perfect is deemed a catastrophic failure, triggering excessive self-criticism and a constant focus on what could have been better, even when the result is objectively excellent. Imagine a software engineer who delivers a complex project ahead of schedule and with only minor, easily fixable bugs. Instead of celebrating the achievement, a perfectionist might dwell solely on those small bugs, convinced they expose their lack of true skill and fearing that their entire reputation is now tarnished. Research consistently links imposter syndrome to these perfectionist tendencies, particularly maladaptive perfectionism characterized by concerns over mistakes and doubts about actions, creating a damaging all-or-nothing mindset. Studies, including a 2018 meta-analysis on perfectionism and imposter phenomenon, highlight a strong correlation, especially with the maladaptive dimensions of perfectionism. This form of perfectionism is a known risk factor for various mental health issues like depression, anxiety, and burnout. The caveat here is that striving for excellence and having high personal standards can be a positive and motivating trait, often termed adaptive perfectionism. However, when this drive transforms into a rigid, unforgiving demand for flawlessness that fuels self-doubt and paralyzes action, it becomes a significant barrier to recognizing your own genuine abilities and can seriously impact well-being. The superhuman. For the superhuman, worth is measured by how many roles can be flawlessly juggled at once, and the moment any one of them isn't handled perfectly, the feeling of being a fraud rushes in. This often manifests as taking on excessive responsibilities, whether at work, at home, or in personal life, driven by an internal need to prove competence through sheer volume of achievement. For example, a working parent might feel compelled to excel as an executive, run a perfect household, volunteer for every school committee, and maintain an active social life, believing that any slip-up in one area will reveal their inadequacy in all. This relentless drive to be all things to all people can lead to chronic overworking, severe burnout, and a constant state of exhaustion as they push themselves beyond sustainable limits to avoid being found out. The psychologist Dr. Valerie Young, who identified 5 types of imposter syndrome, characterizes the superhuman by their tendency to measure success by how many roles they can both juggle and master. While dedication and hard work are admirable qualities, this type of imposter syndrome turns them into a desperate, never-ending performance where rest feels like weakness and asking for help feels like failure. The underlying issue isn't the ambition itself, but the belief that one's value is contingent on this relentless, faultless performance across all domains, ultimately leading to a sense of isolation and a diminishing of true self-worth amidst the outward appearance of boundless capability. The natural genius. The natural genius expects competence to arrive instantly and effortlessly, often believing that if they were genuinely smart or capable, tasks would simply come easily to them. If they have to struggle, or if something doesn't click immediately, they interpret this normal learning process as irrefutable evidence that they don't truly belong. This can be particularly challenging for students or individuals entering new fields. Consider someone starting a new coding bootcamp who sees others seemingly grasp complex concepts faster. The natural genius might conclude they're not cut out for programming, rather than recognizing that learning often involves periods of confusion, iterative attempts, and sustained effort. Research by Carol Dweck on fixed versus growth mindsets highlights this dynamic. Individuals with a fixed mindset believe their intelligence and abilities are inherent traits, leading them to avoid challenges and struggle more when things get difficult. In contrast, those with a growth mindset understand that abilities can be developed through hard work and persistence, viewing challenges as opportunities to learn. The cruel irony for the natural genius is that struggle is precisely how brains grow and learn, as evidenced by neuroscience research on neuroplasticity. But for this imposter type, the very act of struggling feels like an admission of fraud, preventing them from embracing the learning process and often leading to self-sabotage by giving up prematurely. The soloist. For the soloist, asking for help feels like an admission of fraudulence, so any achievement only feels legitimate if it was reached entirely alone. This type often prides themselves on fierce independence, believing that seeking assistance exposes a fundamental weakness or a lack of knowledge, and that their competence is undermined by collaboration. They might spend hours trying to figure out a problem by themselves, even when a quick question to a colleague could resolve it in minutes, leading to inefficiency and unnecessary stress. Imagine an entrepreneur who refuses to delegate tasks to their team, convinced that if they don't personally handle every aspect, their success isn't truly theirs, or that others will perceive them as incapable of leadership. This intense self-reliance can lead to isolation, overwork, and missed opportunities for collaboration, mentorship, and growth, creating a cycle of independence, overwork, exhaustion, isolation, and ultimately reinforced self-doubt. Dr. Valerie Young's work, which categorizes imposter syndrome types, describes the soloist as primarily focused on who carries out the task, believing they must do everything themselves. The caveat here is that while self-sufficiency is a valuable trait, true competence often involves knowing when and how to leverage the expertise of others and recognizing the strength in a collective effort. Denying oneself that support actively hinders progress, limits innovative solutions, and reinforces the feeling of being an isolated, fragile fraud who cannot stand on their own merits without constant, solitary exertion. The expert. The expert feels like a fraud until every possible fact and qualification is mastered, and will often avoid applying for opportunities unless every single listed requirement is already met. This means they constantly pursue more certifications, degrees, or specialized knowledge, believing there's always more to learn before they can truly be considered competent. Picture a marketing professional with a decade of experience, a strong portfolio, and a proven track record of successful campaigns who hesitates to apply for a senior leadership role because they haven't completed a specific, optional executive MBA program or acquired a new, niche digital marketing certification. They use knowledge acquisition as a form of armor, fearing that any gap in their expertise, however minor, will expose them as an unqualified pretender. This can lead to significant delays in career advancement as they perpetually feel underprepared and a reluctance to take on new challenges that might stretch their current knowledge base. The unsettling truth is that no one ever knows everything, especially in rapidly evolving fields like technology or medicine, where continuous learning is paramount but absolute mastery is an illusion. The world often rewards action, calculated risk, and the ability to learn on the job more than endless, exhaustive preparation. The expert's quest for complete mastery can become a self-imposed prison, preventing them from stepping into the very roles they are more than capable of handling, and ironically, limiting their actual growth and impact. Fear of exposure. This is the persistent, specific worry of being publicly found out as less capable than others believe, and it's distinct from ordinary self-doubt in how central it is to daily thinking. It's a profound internal anxiety that someone, somewhere, will inevitably pull back the curtain and reveal you as a fraud. This fear can lead to hypervigilance, constantly tracking how you're perceived, scrutinizing every interaction, and searching for subtle signs of judgment, criticism, or rejection. For instance, a manager might dread delivering a crucial presentation, not primarily because of public speaking itself, but because they are convinced their team or senior leadership will suddenly realize they don't know what they're talking about or that their past successes were mere flukes. This anxiety often leads to intense over-preparation, procrastination, or even avoiding opportunities entirely, such as turning down promotions or declining to speak at conferences. Psychology today notes that this fear of being seen or exposed can stem from early life experiences, such as growing up in environments with conditional love, harsh criticism, or unclear expectations, leading to an internalized belief of "I'm not enough." It's an exhausting psychological burden, where the perceived risk of being unmasked outweighs the satisfaction of genuine achievement, creating a lonely, guarded, and often isolated experience. The competence-confidence. This describes a peculiar disconnect where objective ability and self-rated ability move independently of each other. This is precisely why external validation so often fails to resolve imposter feelings, as the individual's internal belief system overrides any objective proof. You might have a stellar track record, glowing performance reviews, numerous accolades, and a history of significant accomplishments, yet internally, you continue to feel inadequate and undeserving. For example, a highly successful surgeon with a perfect patient outcome record and years of experience might still privately worry they are one mistake away from being exposed as incompetent, or that their impeccable record is simply a long streak of luck. The external evidence of their skill is undeniable, but their internal narrative simply doesn't absorb it. Psychologists note that individuals with imposter syndrome consistently attribute their achievements to external factors like luck, timing, or the help of others, rather than their own skills, intelligence, or efforts. This cognitive distortion creates a chasm between what you know to be true about your performance and how you feel about your worth, making it difficult to internalize success and build lasting confidence. This gap can be particularly frustrating for those trying to support someone with imposter syndrome, as logical arguments and evidence often fail to penetrate the deeply ingrained feelings of fraudulence. Attribution bias in imposter feelings. This is a fascinating reversal of typical human psychology, a cognitive distortion that plays a central role in imposter syndrome. Usually, people attribute their own successes to their skill and effort, and their failures to external circumstances, a pattern that generally protects self-esteem. But with imposter syndrome, this pattern flips entirely. The same success that you explain as luck, good timing, or help from others when it happens to you, you readily attribute to skill and hard work when it happens to someone else. For instance, if you get a promotion, you might think, "I just got lucky," or "they needed someone quickly and I was the only option." But if a colleague gets the same promotion, you'd likely think, "They absolutely earned that. They're so talented and dedicated, it was only a matter of time." This systematic error in how individuals interpret their achievements, identified as an attributional bias, creates a warped self-perception where genuine accomplishments feel unearned and unstable when it comes to oneself. It's a double standard that's almost impossible to win against, as your internal dialogue ensures that you never give yourself credit, even when it's objectively due, perpetuating the feeling of fraudulence. This specific attribution pattern, where objective success is externalized and failure is internalized, is a crucial distinction from generalized low self-esteem, and it actively undermines motivation and self-efficacy. Who reports it most? Survey research consistently finds that imposter syndrome is not confined to any one group by achievement level, and that high performers in unfamiliar or newly prestigious environments report it especially often. While initially thought to affect primarily women, later studies confirmed its prevalence across genders and demographics. For instance, a June 2024 Korn Ferry report found that 71% of U.S. CEOs reported experiencing symptoms of imposter syndrome in their role, a surprisingly high number for individuals at the pinnacle of their careers. This report also noted that senior management, including CEOs, 71%, and other senior executives, 65%, were more likely than early-stage professionals, 33%, to exhibit signs of imposter syndrome, though 85% of CEOs also expressed total competence in their role, highlighting the internal conflict. Similarly, a 2025 meta-analysis found the prevalence to be approximately 62% among health service professionals, and other studies indicate that physicians, despite their extensive training and high-stakes work, experience imposter syndrome frequently. A March 2024 survey indicated that more than half of women, 54%, feel they have experienced imposter syndrome, compared with 38% of men and 57% of those identifying as non-binary. The data also suggests it's more common among younger workers. A March 2024 survey showed Gen Z 66% and millennials 58% were much more likely to have experienced imposter syndrome than Gen X 41% and people in their 60s 25%. Another April 2026 report stated that 27% of workers aged 25 to 39 millennials regularly experience imposter syndrome, compared to just 3% of those aged 65 and above. This sevenfold difference may reflect both career stage effects and cohort effects, with younger generations facing unique pressures like the digital comparison trap and the vanishing entry-level job market. It seems that the higher you climb, or the newer and more challenging the terrain, the more likely you are to feel like you're faking it. The 1978 Origin Study. Psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes first documented this pattern in 1978 in their groundbreaking paper titled The Imposter Phenomenon in High-Achieving Women, Dynamics and Therapeutic Intervention. They described what they called the imposter phenomenon, a term they preferred over syndrome, to avoid pathologizing a common experience based on their clinical observations of over 150 highly successful women. These women, despite holding earned academic degrees, high scores on standardized tests, and professional recognition from colleagues, shared a profound internal sense of intellectual phoniness. They were convinced they were not truly intelligent and had somehow fooled everyone into believing otherwise, fearing they would eventually be found out. For example, Clance and Imes noted a law student with top grades might genuinely believe the admissions committee made a mistake by accepting her, or a highly respected professional woman attributed her job to a fluke because they needed someone quickly. The standard telling of this research often highlighted it as a uniquely female experience, rooted in societal sex role stereotyping, as their initial clinical sample was predominantly women. However, Clance and Imes themselves indicated in their paper that whether it occurred in men needed further investigation, and later research, including studies by the early 1980s, demonstrated that men do experience the phenomenon with similar frequency. While Clance and Imes' groundbreaking work illuminated the phenomenon at its core attributional patterns, the initial focus on women was a caveat that later studies broadened considerably, revealing its universal reach. Why it doesn't resolve with more achievement? The relentless cycle of imposter syndrome means that each new success, instead of building genuine confidence, simply gets folded into the same luck or fluke explanation that dismissed the last one. The internal narrative is so powerful and deeply ingrained that objective evidence of competence never accumulates into a felt sense of deserving. For example, you might receive the prestigious industry award for innovation, and instead of taking pride in your hard work and ingenuity, you might think, I just happen to be in the right place at the right time with a popular idea. Or, they probably gave it to me because they liked me, not because I'm actually good at what I do. This cognitive distortion, where accomplishments are systematically externalized and personal effort and ability are minimized, prevents the internal validation necessary to overcome the feeling of being a fraud. As noted by Clance and Imes, the more plentiful the accolades, the more anxious individuals become that they will be found out, rather than feeling more secure. The constant fear of being exposed means that even when you reach new heights, the stakes only feel higher, reinforcing the need to keep up the act rather than truly owning your achievements. It's a self-perpetuating loop where the goalposts of self-worth constantly shift further away, ensuring that no amount of external success ever feels truly sufficient to quiet the internal critic, leading to ongoing psychological distress and dissatisfaction. Subscribe to Impulse, and the next video is waiting for you on screen right now.